Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Immigrant Pod. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of speaking to Sebastian. Most of you know Sebastian Krys from his skill, his talents, the type of work he's put out in the marketplace. As an immigrant, he's had his own struggles, but he's had plenty of success, and this is the reason why we have him on the Immigrant Pod. Welcome to the Immigrant Nation podcast, where we bring you the inspiring journeys of immigrants who have made a global impact. Today, we are honored to host the amazing Sebastian Krys, a 6-time Grammy and 13-time Latin Grammy winning producer, engineer, and music executive.
Correct you, but it's 8 and 14.
Okay, up to 14, right? Who's counting? From arriving in the US as an undocumented immigrant to shaping the sounds of legends like Shakira, Ricky Martin, and Gloria Estefan, Krys has redefined Latin music. We will delve into his journey, his creative process, and what it takes to succeed in the ever-evolving music industry. Stay tuned for an incredible conversation here at the Immigrant Pod. Krys, say hi to our listeners and tell us what you're up to today.
Hello. Well, today is my mom's 79th birthday. So unfortunately, she's in Miami. I'm in LA, but I had a call with her earlier, and it's a fun day. And what else am I? I'm talking to you. That's it. And I'm actually getting ready for my 6th and final cycle of chemotherapy tomorrow. That starts tomorrow and ends on Tuesday.
Wow.
So I've been on, I got diagnosed with cancer back in October of last year, and been on chemotherapy for this is going to be like 6 months of treatment after surgery. So, but I won't bore you with that.
Well,
but I'm getting my head ready for how much fun that is.
Well, tell you what, we're here. We will keep you in prayer. We support you. Let us know if there's anything we can do beyond prayer and supporting you. But also,
I'm the only person I know who gained weight during chemotherapy. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the wonderful thing about who you are. You find joy in the things that most of us would struggle with, right? You're looking forward to your chemotherapy. Obviously, you will do well.
I'm looking forward to being over with it.
Tell you what, once we get better, we can work on the overweight part. That's gonna be easy. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Right. But again, a shout out to your mom and happy birthday, mom. At the Immigrant Podcast, we want to thank you for your son and to celebrate you today as you celebrate your birthday. So happy birthday. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Walk us through your immigration story.
So I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. My mom was born in Bolivia, in La Paz, and her parents' story is pretty remarkable because they lived. My ancestry is from Poland, and they were able to escape, Hitler's Poland. Probably, I'd say about 3 months before everybody got put into the ghettos in Poland, and my grandmother with my 3 uncles got into they were on the last ship out of Poland before they closed the ports.
Mm-hmm.
So they traveled to New York. They were turned away. They traveled to Cuba. They were turned away. Traveled to Buenos Aires. They were turned away. They went around the Horn, around the rim of Latin America. They went to Santiago. They were turned away. And they were able to get out in a little port called Arica in northern Chile, because Bolivia was one of the few countries that was taking refugees at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So they were at sea for months and months and months. My uncle, who's still alive, he's 87. The youngest of the 3 almost died from typhoid. Because the ship had probably about 500 staterooms and 3,000 people in it. And they were able to get out because they had a train ticket from Chile to Bolivia because Bolivia is landlocked. So even though they were taking refugees, they had to go through a train through the Andes Mountains and ended up in Bolivia. So I come from a long line of immigrants that are fleeing sort of craziness in their own country. For us, it was there was a military dictatorship in Argentina in the 80s and 70s. And my parents decided that that's not where they wanted their kids to grow up. So my dad came here 2 months before, very much like my grandfather in Bolivia who went before. And then we immigrated on May 1st, 1980 to Miami. And I was 9 years old, my brother was 12, my sister was 4, I want to say. And, undocumented. And we were able to get the papers about 3 years then.
So you've come from a long line of relatives, family members who are persistent and really dedicated to the path of life where they need to get away from turmoil. And to get to some kind of what you would call stability and a future that is promising for the generations to come. What is that drive that you are capable of looking back and you can see it back in your grandparents?
Well, talk about strife. They fled Hitler and then were in Bolivia during the Bolivian Revolution, so they had to live through that. It's interesting. You just don't, the way I always look at it is you don't want to be the one person in your family that was able to, listen, they escaped the Nazis.
Yes.
They escaped certain death. And you don't want to be the one person in your family that doesn't take that into account and doesn't succeed at whatever it is that you want to do. Because that, it's very random. That kind of, whether people are fleeing from famine or war or whatever it is, your existence becomes very random. It's a series of events that have to happen in order for you to be here.
Yes.
And that's not lost upon me. When I talk about my grandparents and what they went through, and my brother became very successful, so did my sister, and I think it has a lot to do with that, with that immigrant, story that we all share very much. Listen, I have a philosophy about who I want to hire when I work, and it's either an immigrant or somebody who was in the armed forces.
Why?
Because they're going to work harder than anybody else. It's just in you see kids now. I'm 54. I see kids now that that don't have the work ethic and that you see in an immigrant. When people say, well, they're taking our jobs, it's like, I don't think you'd last 5 minutes in a job of somebody, like a migrant worker. I know I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. My life has been too comfortable. I just, I'd go out there and about 10 minutes into it, I'd be like, white flag, I'm done.
Yeah.
So it's very, it's interesting what we're going through now in this country, and really it's happening in Europe. It's happening everywhere.
So
people blame
immigrants for what is going on in their countries.
Yeah, and some of what is going on is really, people are just angry. I don't think they know why they're angry. But I guess you have to, for me, my philosophy with that is I have to listen to them, and I have to engage people. I have many friends who are all over the spectrum, the political spectrum. It's far right, far left, wherever it is. And I think the thing that we have to do now as people is listen to each other, which is not what we're doing.
listening to each other is really really important, and I think you have that ear that really pays attention to what's going around, and really that probably is formed from what the history of your family has been. They listened and they watched what was happening around them, and then they made a decision to leave when it was time to leave,
Time to leave, yeah.
right? And so if we speak a little bit about the troubles immigrants have across the globe. Immigrants are migrating in massive numbers and across everywhere in the globe because of several things have changed, right? Transportation has become more efficient, more and very accessible to most people. And then what has not been easily accessible and available to most people is a reliable environment where it's peaceful and people can thrive, and reliable economies that people can depend on and they can be able to raise their families in those type of environments. And so the majority of immigrants, when they're migrating, all they're looking for is a better life where they can raise their children and they can build a life and they can become part of a solution in that society. When, as immigrants, do we get to a point where we have to defend our identity, right? Because, like in the US, also in Europe, there is this false narrative that is spread by politicians about what an immigrant is and how they are here to either take advantage of your environment or to also take advantage of who you are.
Right, and I think that's right on. I mean, it's interesting to me that, as we were talking before, I can pass for an American. I don't have an accent. I'm white. I could just like blend in. And it was very interesting when I was a kid and I would blend in, and at that time there were a lot of people who came in Miami who came from Cuba and Nicaragua because of the situation in Cuba and because Nicaragua was in a civil war. And kids would talk in Spanish behind me, and I'd turn around and I'd be like, I'd talk back to them in Spanish, and they were like, "Oh God, how do you know Spanish?" And I think that's the thing. It's like my parents were very relaxed about being immigrants, but they were also like, listen, you got to assimilate the culture without losing your identity. And I think that's the trick. I think the trick is, as people who live here, how do we help people who just immigrated assimilate the culture without losing their identity? How do you enjoy and learn about, as somebody who, has lived in Miami and was surrounded by people from Cuba, people from Nicaragua. I was from Argentina, which is pretty isolated in Latin America. I mean, it's not, it doesn't really border with much, especially since most people live in the city of Buenos Aires. How do you, I just remember like I'll give you an example. I remember we were in a 2-bedroom apartment when we first moved. So me, my sister, and my brother shared a room. My parents shared another room. And in that community, there was a pool. And we went to the pool, and my mom was talking to us in Spanish. And this lady started screaming at my mom, speak in English. You came to, don't, kind of like your typical, sort of. And I remember I was 9 years old. I was looking at this lady. I'm like, what's wrong with this person? Why? My mom's talking to her kids. She's not talking about this person. Like why is she so angry? And I think that we fear that anything new, I think human nature is to fear it.
Fear of the unknown.
And to get rid of it, as opposed to be curious about it.
So walk us through, how did the 9-year-old you figure out how to deal with people who were around you, but they were fearful of who you are because they did not identify with your culture?
Well, I think part of it was in my head, I split it. So I wouldn't let people know where I was from. I wouldn't let people know that I was from Argentina. I wouldn't let people know that I was Jewish. You know, and because it almost gave me an upper hand, so I could really listen and hear what people had to say, what people thought about, immigrants. Because in Miami at the time there was a huge influx. During the Mariel boat lift, I mean, Castro opened up the jails, and everybody, let about I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people were in the Mariel boat lift, but we got to Miami about 2 weeks before that happened. So I grew up with a bunch of kids who, were brought to Miami kind of at the same time as I was, with very, very different experiences. And they were brought into a community where there was already a Cuban community there. There wasn't an Argentine community at that time. So, to me, I was sort of, I thought it was fun to play that game. I thought it was fun to play the game of, like, my brother and I worked very hard to not have accents.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but, we felt like having an accent was a choice. At that age, obviously, my mom has a very thick accent. My dad had an accent. But when you're 9, you're 12, you can kind of
polish it quite quickly.
Fudge it,
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I would go somewhere with my dad, and then somebody would say something, about him, and I remember my dad was trying to buy a car one time, and the car salesman said something about Jewish people, because obviously you don't know that if somebody's Jewish by looking at them, so my dad got very offended and left, and this guy lost his sale because of his anti-Semitism. And it's those things that teach you, I guess, how to to be a little bit more empathetic. I really disagree with Mr. Musk that empathy is the downfall of Western civilization. I think lack of empathy is the downfall.
So there you go. Yeah.
Because it's really, I mean, if you can't help, if you can't be there for somebody, for a fellow human being, if you can't empathize with their situation, really, what do you have, as a person? So, yeah, it's very interesting. It's like right now we're living through this. Well, first of all, I call what's happening, I've always called it World War Stupid, because people don't know why they're angry. They don't know why they're fighting. I remember I saw this thing on TV where this guy was mad that it was a crime to urinate on a building. And that was his whole thing. And the reporter said, so what you really want is to have the freedom to go urinate on a building. That's why you're angry at the Democrats. That's why you're angry at your fellow citizen. And the guy was like, yeah. And I was like, wow, you're willing to like shoot people and, and deport people because of your right to go not use a bathroom.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, wow, this is really dumb,
People sometimes tend to lose perspective of what's important and what's not important. But again, I also believe that's also subject to someone's interpretation and especially based on their experiences in life. As you were growing up, you found it really important for, like you said, for you and your brother to work on polishing your accent. I'm assuming that is part of that survival mechanism within you that was kicking in, having looked at what it would take to become successful. Do you think having an accent can hinder an immigrant from becoming successful in the marketplace?
No, I don't. I think that having I think that struggling with language can.
Yes, of course.
But an accent shouldn't. I mean, I think, listen, this is the United States is such a fascinating place because, I look at Argentina and we've had, 4 female presidents already.
Mm-hmm.
I look at this country who elected, Obama twice. And it's still a very racist country. But it's definitely not as racist as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you a little story that my friend told me one time. So do you know who Dizzy Gillespie was?
Yes, I do, actually.
The trumpet player?
Yes.
So he was touring in the 50s through the South, and he had a Cuban percussionist.
Yes.
And there was, it was back when there was a whites only, restaurant, whites only. So they stop at a gas station to fill up the bus. And the Cuban, percussionist, who happens to be black, goes, "I'm hungry, I'm going to go get something to eat." And they're trying to explain to him, like, you can't go, it's whites only. It's like, listen, I'm hungry. That's a restaurant, I'm hungry, I'm going to go get something to eat. And he goes in, he opens the door, everybody's looking at him, he sits at the counter, and he says, "Listen, I'm hungry. I'm not black. I'm Cuban. And I want to eat." And they served them. And it was like, it's like he made that distinction of like, these are not the droids you're looking for, like Star Wars. And it was like, wow.
That's very interesting.
And that's the power of just that distinction that he made of going like, oh no, you think you're seeing what you're seeing, but you're not seeing what you're seeing. Therefore, I am not subject to your stupid rule that only whites can eat here.
Yeah.
And that's, going back to the accent thing, I think more than an accent, it's an attitude. And I think that that's the great thing about the immigrants that I've met, is that most immigrants that I've met that have been successful, it has to do with them not allowing themselves to feel like victims. And that has a lot to do with experience. I mean, what people go through to get to places for opportunity dwarfs really, an accent or anything like that.
Krys, you've obviously gone through tough times, right? Migrating from one country to another is
difficult.
It's difficult. It's tough for most people.
Yeah.
Talking about going through tough times, how have you been able to keep your head above water during those times?
Well, I think that, it doesn't, when you people don't understand how hard it is to immigrate, whether you're a child or you're an older person.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more difficult for adults than it is for children.
Yeah, and it's hard for children because you don't understand what's going on. I mean, at 9, I didn't understand what being undocumented meant. Why couldn't we go back and see our family? Back to Argentina. Why couldn't I go back and see our friends? And it was a time where communication was not, I remember, my mom calling, and it was so expensive that they'd yell into the phone for a minute and then be like, bye. You never got to talk to anybody. You never got to be present with the people that you love, and you really left those people behind. And it was very, 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 very difficult. And it was difficult for my mom. My mom did not want to be here. I think that's why it took her longer to assimilate. It's really my dad's decision it was both of their decision, but the decision came because my mom's eye doctor's son, who was 17, was kidnapped and killed. It got to the point where in the beginning, the kidnappings and the torture and the killing were political, and then it became a business.
Yeah.
And people would ask for ransom, and, even after the military dictatorship was gone, that was one of the hallmarks that stayed. And that was why my dad wanted us to get out of there, because my brother was 12, was only 5 years away from being the same age as this kid who was killed, by the military dictatorship. So it's that lack of not understanding why a piece of paper gives you status.
Right.
And I always tell people, listen, people are undocumented, they're not illegal. There's no such thing as an illegal human being. And that distinction matters. That you're looking at a person whose legal status may be in play. His documents may not be right. But that person is not an illegal person. He has a right to exist. He has a right to persevere.
Language has power, and how people use certain words is really, really critical. When you sit back and you look at how people are categorized, for example, they've migrated from one country to another, but they are undocumented. Why is it that in America, for example, or even in Europe, because we have just about similar problems, we address people as illegal immigrants?
Because it's very easy for somebody to say you broke the law. It's a lot harder for somebody to say, okay, you may have overstayed your welcome. Maybe you broke the law, but what is going on right now that doesn't allow you to have status? And that's the thing about the immigration system in this country is that, this ridiculous thing with the gold card, and the fact that we're gonna, sell status.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, okay, there's, how many undocumented people are in this country? What are they doing? Because I can tell you one thing. I've never met an undocumented immigrant who doesn't pay taxes.
That's for starters.
Yeah, everybody pays taxes. It doesn't matter, like they say, the only certain things in life are death and taxes.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
But you have now like you have the migrant problem, the day labor problem, where these are jobs that need to get done. Why don't they start fixing the immigration system? Because it's very easy for these people that aren't educated as to what's going on to say, well, if you come here legally, and there's no legal path to coming here. There's no path that makes sense. There's no path for somebody who is a day laborer or a migrant worker to come here and work and fill that need that this country has. And you can ask any farmer or any rancher, like right now with these ice raids, they're going to go out of business and their crops aren't going to get picked, and that's just a reality.
Yeah.
Why are people being so hard-headed about fixing the system?
I am so glad you went there, because this is important, right? I have lived in the US for about 22 years. And I don't remember a conversation looking back in the last 4 or so presidents that have been presidents in my time in this country. Is a conversation that has been very conclusive and very direct on how do we create an immigration system that actually works. Rather, what we've had these cycles of excitement up and down where we're either allowing an influx of people to come in the country and then we can make a lot of noise, or we are making a lot of noise because of raising fear, so that fear can help people be accelerated emotionally so that they can end up in the election booth and they can put you in office. That way you can push your agenda on and on and on. But you, sir, having that beautiful year you have, because it's your year that has gotten you to the skill you have now, where you can be able to derive different sounds and you can be able to tell a different story and still combine that story into one in form of music. How do we learn to listen? And I hope you're not just speaking to immigrants at the moment now, but you're also going to speak to everybody else that's affected by the idea of immigration. How do we learn to listen to one another so that we can really get to understand not just what our values and cultures are, but what is right by humanity?
Right. Well, I think that number one is you have to be, you mentioned the last 4 presidents. I mean, you have to learn from your past. Obama deported record numbers of people.
He did.
That were here. I don't think he was, I understand what he was trying to do, but that didn't work either.
Because the immigration system was not fixed.
No. And I think that right now, in order to fix the immigration system, you need somebody who truly understands what the needs of this country is. Yes, I want people to come here legally. As an immigrant, I wish that I didn't have to go through that whole thing of waiting years to see my family. I was a child, so I didn't have much of a choice, but and I didn't understand it at the time. But as an immigrant, as now somebody who has a citizenship and who has become part of this country and the fabric of this country, I do want people to come here legally. But we need to give people a system that works. We need to give people a way to come here legally. We can't just decide that, that this is a perfect system, and say if you use it, then you'll, because it's somebody who works in Latin music, which is a huge industry, by the way, in this country. There are people that you need to work with, sometimes with people who culturally are different than what's already here, in order to make music, in order to have this industry. I think the same for the culinary industry. I think that's the same for pretty much anything where you use somebody's culture as part of the industry.
So, having conversation on what the immigrant experience is like and how people interpret the understanding of who an immigrant is and how they have an impact in our society, and that kind of got lost in our life issues.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I think the other issue, not just about immigrant, legality of status, is that it's important for the immigrants to assimilate, to learn the language, to learn the culture that they're going into, and to bring the best of their culture into it. Because it's very, like my wife was born here. And, part of her frustration is like, we'll go to a place like Miami and people will start speaking to her in Spanish. In every interaction, and listen, obviously she doesn't have a problem with immigrants, she married one, but it's hard for somebody. I get that. You know what I mean? I get somebody whose country you go into, you should learn the language, you should learn the culture, whatever that culture is. And the United States is such a huge country that, the culture is different in every city, practically.
Yes.
But, like, for instance, I'll take you through my cancer diagnosis. The person who performed the surgery to remove the tumor was from Peru. The person who is my lead doctor is from India. And I mean, everybody who I dealt with pretty much in this journey has been an immigrant. Now, you're talking about people who are at the top of their field, particularly this, the doctor from India, Dr. Samaya. She's known the world over as a specialist for this type of cancer. Now, and she's, at MD Anderson in Houston, which is, a world-renowned facility that treats all sorts of cancers and only cancers. Now, do you want to have a system that precludes having somebody like that in your country? And treating people? Do you want to... What's that?
I would presume the answer is no.
I would imagine so. So, it's very simple to just... And the thing about law and legality is that it doesn't distinguish. Right now what I see is... it's very interesting to me that we've given a machete to an immigrant from South Africa to, chop the federal government. And with it is going, cancer research and all sorts of things that, it's like shoot first, ask questions later is what they're doing right now.
Yes.
And I just, I don't understand it, because I feel like, again, you'd think somebody like that would have a little bit more empathy. Obviously they don't. But I think it's important to remind yourself, yes, I've had a lot of success, but I don't feel like I'm special. I don't feel like,
For him applies, at least.
What's that?
I don't think that applies specifically for Elon. And if I can judge him as an immigrant, I don't think that really applies, because if I can go back to how you quoted him earlier, right? Empathy is going to be our downfall. And you suggested very cleverly that lack of empathy is what can be our downfall, right? He is running or is trying to get the government to run as a business. And as a business person, I completely understand why he deems the cuts necessary. I think there's a disconnect here, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? The disconnect I think we have is he does not understand the function of the government, right? And for me, the government is what creates that bridge for people and entities to be successful. And without a successful government, a people can never be successful, because democracy becomes difficult to execute, business becomes difficult to execute, capitalism can never exist without a democratic government, and on and on and on. And so for you and I,
well, and that's the thing, that you hit it right there. Capitalism can't exist without a democratic government. Capitalism is not a democracy. And that's the problem I think that we face in this country. I think we've confused capitalism with democracy. Infrastructure is, bridges, being able to go over a bridge and knowing that it's not going to fall into the water is important. It's not a great business, but it's important,
It's not a great,
but
it's a government.
Getting on a plane.
Yes.
Yeah, the government is the only people that can execute that.
Mm-hmm.
Getting on an airplane and knowing that it's going to get you there, that the people working at in the tower are well trained and are rested, and and there's enough of them, is important. It's not great business, but it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start having these failures because we try to run the government as a business, we don't understand government. Listen, I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism is great, but not at the cost of people's lives and livelihood. I want, the Environmental Protection Agency to protect the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want somebody running the EPA who thinks that climate change is a hoax. And I can tell you that probably everybody in this city who just saw these fires probably would agree.
I mean,
because
you and
I've lived here 14 years and it's the first time that that's happened.
Yeah, and you and I can look at our weather patterns in the last 20 years, and you can really see a significant difference in what our weather has become in the last 6-7 years. It's not the same thing.
Well, and I think that, like you said before, words matter. I think the discourse that Schwarzenegger had when he was governor was right on,
mm-hmm.
which was, okay, let's not talk about climate change. Let's not. Let's assume there's no climate change. Do you want to breathe clean air? You want your kids to breathe clean air? The answer is probably yes. You don't want your kids to breathe polluted air. Do you want your kids to drink clean water? The answer is probably yes. So I think that part of the discourse needs to change. We can't politicize everything. As humans, we need air and we need water in order to live.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start there. Okay, what do we need to do in order to have clean water? Okay, we need to clean this, and that. What do we need to do to have clean air? We need clean air vehicles. We need to not pollute the atmosphere. And if you start there, I don't think anybody will go like, I want to breathe dirty air. I want to get lung cancer from the air. I want to get, liver cancer from the water. I don't think anybody wants that.
No.
And like right now, it's funny. I bought a Tesla in 2017. I love the car. I didn't know that it was going to become a political statement.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, 5-6 years later. I didn't know that I was going to have to explain to people, listen, I bought this car. It's paid for. I can't afford a new car because it just went up 20% because of this dumb trade war that we're having with Canada of all places. You know, I can't. I mean, I can't and I won't. You know, and I wish that I wish that Tesla would continue to be a healthy car company. I wish that this guy would go back to running that and just, and be somebody who advocates for, a cleaner earth, which was what it was at the beginning, of his tenure. I don't know what happened. I think that part with Elon is that I think he sees that the world needs saving as long as it's him that's saving it. Nobody else can save it but him.
Yeah.
In his mind, and it's really a shame, to watch people that had so much potential become so toxic.
And that's
yeah, and it's really a shame because I'm, everybody in Los Angeles who bought a Tesla, which is a lot of every other car here is a Tesla in LA, and you have to apologize for the car you're driving. I think that when we've gotten to that point, listen, I mean, I don't know what the politics are of the people who, who sell Mercedes or who sell Ford. And I shouldn't. I shouldn't know what the politics are of people like that.
Yeah.
But, getting back to undocumented and being an immigrant, I think that part of the immigrants' responsibility is to assimilate the culture, assimilate the language without losing your identity.
That's profound. That's profound that you say that. Because one of the things that I have noted over time is that immigrants do move in partners, and they also we also live in partners. And let me explain myself. So, for example, we have Haitians who migrate to probably Miami and stay there. We have Cubans who migrate to Miami and stay there. And we have Nigerians who will migrate to, say, some city in Arizona. They seem to proliferate there. The issue I've had is you are still lost, or you're still really embedded in what your values and what your cultures were, and you're not really mixing with what you have migrated into and trying to learn what their values are and what their cultures are, so that you can be able to assimilate accordingly and maybe even succeed a little bit faster. And so I have pushed the idea of, yes, it's always good to keep your roots and your culture, and it's good to keep, but it's even better if you could move somewhere that is a little bit stranger than what you're used to, and really get to learn those people and get to assimilate in their culture, because it's in that you become more effective, more efficient, and have more of an impact in society. Do you disagree with my assessment?
No, I think that's right on. I think also, though, we have to have a process where people help other people, immigrants, assimilate. Not where you're scared of them, where you're yelling at people just because they sound different or look different. But this country has a long history of that, I mean, it was the Irish at one point. The people they wanted, it was the Italians at another point that people didn't want here. And it's a long history of that, of being afraid of that which is different. I always think that it's you really break that point, that bridge, you bridge that gap through food and through music.
You do.
You know, because I don't know if you remember, but you might be too young. But you know, if you saw the list of, like, let's say you saw the list of the 10 most beautiful women in the world, according to the United States, back in 1982.
Starting with Marilyn.
Everybody looked like Farrah Fawcett. Everybody was blonde and blue-eyed.
That's right.
If you saw that same list by 1998, then you had Salma Hayek and you had Jennifer Lopez. It looks very different than it did, you know, before.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you know, people's idea of beauty evolved because of immigration.
Yes.
Food evolved because of immigration. If you went to Miami in the 80s, God, if you found one restaurant with decent food that wasn't a Cuban restaurant, good luck. You know, now Miami is like a culinary powerhouse in the world. And it's because of immigration. You know, the most popular beer in the world used to be, you know, Budweiser. Not in the world, but in the United States. Now it's Corona.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a thing called Taco Tuesday now. You know, yeah.
And Taco Wednesday.
It's like, yeah. I mean, you just, you know, that's people assimilating the culture in a positive way.
Yes.
You know, I'm bringing the best of their culture to you know, this country or countries in Europe. I think that it's very, you know, it's not going to get us anywhere good if we entrench ourselves and not share those things. You know, and if only we entrench ourselves with our kind, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, like, for you, you're from Africa, right?
That is true.
So you're from Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure. What was it like for you when you came to this country and you saw what you know, black culture was? And I'm sure that was foreign to you.
Very disappointing, frustrating, actually. It's not what
Why?
TV.
Why was it disappointing and frustrating?
Because I did not feel a sense of belonging. Things I admired the most about the African American culture is not what I found on the ground. What was on TV was very curated to sell what America looked like, but it was not the reality on the ground, if I can put it that way.
Right, and how would you fix that?
You know, I've never thought about that. But I think we are indirectly fixing that through this, right? By being able to start to express the views of the immigrant and what our experiences are and how those experiences can enrich the culture that we found here, whether that is what you'd consider a Southern culture or the East and West Coast cultures, Midwest culture, however you look at it. I think when we get to a place where we begin to understand who we are as an immigrant and we bring our values to the nation we've migrated, then those people seem to or get to a place where they start appreciating who we are, then we really can start to get to understand what their values are, and we can express ourselves not just by our immigrating values, but by their values. And that's what I missed when I came to the US. Now it has changed, right? I've lived here for many years. Now I've learned how to assimilate in that, but it's not the picture I had when I was coming or when I was
right.
in the US.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You know, it takes a lot of effort from a lot of people.
Yes, it does.
And people that go, okay, so if I was born in this country, I go, why do I have to change? You know.
That's a toughie.
Right. And if you come here and you see that person is not willing to change, and you feel like any change you make is a loss of identity, then it becomes the same question on both sides. Why do I have to change? You know?
That's the part where I've always said the majority of immigrants, we're lost in translation, right? You migrate to a country, you come to the US, and you don't feel sense of belonging, and you live here so many years, and then you go back to what would be considered your motherland, and you also don't feel like you belong there.
Yeah.
And so now
Because you don't.
all right, you're left in this middle translation where it's almost very lonely, right? You have these values, you know they're good, you share them and they admire them, but nobody wants to embrace them. They just want you to embrace theirs, and that's difficult.
I'll tell you a story. When I was a kid, I got invited to a birthday party, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Argentina, you greet everybody with a kiss. Men kiss men, women kiss women, men kiss women. And I remember that all the moms were sitting, you know, like against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to say hello. The way I knew how. So I kissed every single one of the moms. And they were all like embarrassed and flushed, and you know, this is a country, a handshake country, if that.
Yeah.
And I remember going like, oh, okay, so that's not how we greet people here, you know.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like, okay, it's better to greet people this way. It's much more friendly. It's, you know. And then, as you said, you know, you go back to your country and it's like, it was awkward as a teenager. You know, a guy comes up and gives you a kiss when, you know, on the cheek when you say hello, and it was awkward, you know, for me going back to Argentina
Mm-hmm.
and greeting people that way.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, okay, you know, you're going through your whole craziness as a teenager, and you know, trying to figure out who you are and trying to assert your manhood, whatever insanity you're going through.
Yes.
As a teenager, and understand that that's just a greeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a sexual thing. It's not a, you know, it doesn't mean anything other than hello.
Yeah.
You know,
Very.
and then obviously, you know, you become an adult and you realize that that's what that is, and it's okay if a gay person says hello to you like that, you know, because they're not looking for anything. They're just looking to say hello.
Boss.
In their culture.
Yes.
And it was very interesting to me that, like, I remember when I was, you know, I was 9 years old, I was going down the line, and like in the middle of it, I was like, oh, this is getting awkward. Like these ladies are, the way they're reacting to me is weird. This is weird, you know. But then, like you said, you go back to your country and you're no longer greeting people like that, so then it becomes weird, you know.
Yeah.
That's how people, you know, that's how people greet each other there.
So is this what led you to your successful music career? How did you discover your talent, and how did you nurture it?
I think that for that, number one, I think being an immigrant absolutely informed myself and my success. Number one, because I had the opportunity, which I don't know if I would have had the same opportunity if I would have stayed in Argentina.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's very many successful people that have come out of Argentina in my field, probably more successful than me. But I just felt, number one, I felt like I couldn't fail. Like, failure is not an option.
Uh-huh.
I think as much because of being an immigrant from Argentina as my ancestors were immigrants to South America. You know?
Yeah.
I felt like I owed it to my parents who made all these sacrifices. I felt like I owed it to my grandparents who made all those sacrifices. You know, it was important to me, even though, you know, my grandmother was no longer alive. I knew what she had sacrificed.
Yeah.
Coming to Bolivia, just to save her kids. So I think that was very crucial in my success. I think it was very important. It informed everything. And I think not having a backup plan is good.
Okay.
When you go into something like music, I think it's important to not have a plan B.
So
I had no plan B. I had a plan A and plan A, and plan A. So
this is big for me, right? Because most people step into something timid, right? And immigrants, we're some of us are guilty of this, right? If this does not work, then I think this that I know is going to work. Yet we've traveled for miles without knowing what our destination is gonna look like, or we've lived in places where there has been a lot of pushback for who we are. Why is it that even with all the trials and tribulations we go through, that there's some of us who want to dip their toes in the water rather than dive into the pool?
The answer to that question is, I think that's cultural. I think it's culture. I don't think you can paint, just like you can't paint anybody with a wide brush.
Mm-hmm.
You can't paint all immigrants with a wide brush either.
That's right.
Like, I remember talking to a friend of mine member of a band that I worked with.
But wait.
And
when you say you can't paint all immigrants with a white brush, why is it that is okay for us to paint immigrants with a white brush by saying we all work hard?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I could find a lazy immigrant, but I think that work ethic, I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but for me, again, it had to do with the sacrifices my parents made.
Yes.
It had to do with, seeing my mom struggle with her decision.
For me, I didn't think I had a choice. There was no choice. I did not have a choice to go back. And there was no choice to fail. Right. So it was, if I get out, I stand up and I keep going until I get to the end, no matter how many times I take a punch.
Well, and I think that's it. I think the other part of that question is, like, culturally, my friend was explaining to me that sometimes, in his culture, in the sort of, it's interesting, and I need to word this right. So he comes from a Mexican-American background.
Mm-hmm.
By and large, my experience with Mexican-Americans here in LA is that it's some of the hardest working people you'll ever meet.
I think that's across the country.
Why then is the stereotype that Mexicans are lazy?
That's a new one for me. Walk me through that.
I don't know where that comes from. Because my experience is the exact opposite. And I can venture to say that most people that have had firsthand experience with, whether it's somebody who comes from a white collar background or a blue collar background, who happens to be, of Mexican descent, I've yet to meet somebody that I go like, God, that person is really lazy. But for some reason, that's always been the stereotype.
Right.
Now, this friend of mine was explaining to me that in his culture, in his sort of second generation, third generation Mexican American culture, it's kind of even success is a tricky thing to navigate in the culture. Because he said, yeah, a lot of times people are like, oh, now you think you're better because you have success.
Yeah, that statement right there.
Yeah, and it's not about that, you know. I mean, first of all, you have to define, how do you define success? Number one. Is, you know, do you define it by, because I've always defined it in one way, which is I get to do what I love for a living. That's success. It's not how much money I have. It's not, you know, it's not any of that, the measuring sticks that let's say a Donald Trump might use.
Yeah.
You know, for success. It's not the business of success. It's that every day I get to wake up and I get to do what I love. That's success.
Yeah.
And how do you get there? Well, I think, like you said, not having options is important. I think that whether you're an immigrant or not, you know, and it's something that's very difficult to impart upon your children. I have this conversation with my youngest son all the time. It's like, man, just, if you love something, do that. And then if you don't want to do it, change. It doesn't mean that you're a failure because you changed your mind. It means that you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life.
That's right.
But since most of our lives are spent working, at least try to do something that you're going to enjoy. Because if not, you're going to make a bunch of money and you're going to be miserable.
There's a lot of that.
You know. Oh, God. In music, I never understood people who make music that they don't like. You know. And that to me, you know, and they're miserable. They end up making, you know, they end up buying the Bentley and they end up buying the house on the water and all that. And they're miserable. You know, because at the end of the day, they took this thing that they had a deep love for and figured out a way how to screw it up.
Yeah.
You know? So, I mean, for me, you know, yeah. It's interesting, that question of how come as an immigrant how can you paint that wide brush as an immigrant? I think that perspective is important. The perspective of not allowing yourself a plan B. And like, I had an assistant who is now an executive at Universal, and I hired him because he's from Portugal, right? And you know, the interview went okay. I wasn't very impressed by him, and he knows this. I've already told the story. So I go, "Where do you live?" And he goes, "I live in a house with 25 other people." I'm like, "What?" Yeah, it's like this house. There's 5 refrigerators. There's like cots everywhere. And it's artists and people just are here in LA trying to make it. It's the only thing we can afford. And I hired him on the spot. I was like, "You're hired." How come? Because if that's what you're willing to do, to chase your dream, you know, and I can be part of that. I can help you get there. It's impressive. I mean, I don't know if I would do that. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would live in a house with 25 other people.
5 other strangers.
You know? No. And now he's become very successful. He's an executive at, like I said, at Universal. He's doing it. But part of the reason he's doing it is because of that. And I don't know how many, I don't know if my kids who were born in this country or my nieces and nephews would do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, they don't have that experience.
Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we are speaking with Sebastian Krys. Sebastian is a 14-time Latin Grammy Award-winning producer, engineer, and music executive. From arriving in the U.S. as an undocumented immigrant to shaping the sound of legends like Shakira, Ricky Martin, and Gloria Estefan. Please tell us, making music with Shakira, Ricky Martin, who is a better person to work with, and what was a fun project for you?
I mean, every project has its challenges, as much because of the project or because of yourself and how you see yourself in the project.
Mm-hmm.
To me, how do you insert yourself into somebody's music and help them find their true voice? And that's always a challenge. And sometimes people know exactly who they are, and sometimes you have to help them, find that. I can count in one hand the projects that I haven't had fun in,
Mm-hmm.
So I've been extremely fortunate, to work with the people that I've worked with. And the other thing is that you find is that how hard these people work. You see all the, people see all the glamour and all that stuff, but they don't see the artist at 1 o'clock in the morning in the studio trying to make things, the way that they envision it. They don't see all that, and they don't see listen, I wouldn't call it a sacrifice, but they don't see what it's like the challenge of somebody who's like a mom to young kids having to tour,
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of the challenges these artists face are the same as what anybody faces, trying to find that work-life balance and, trying to figure out what their next move is.
Yeah.
Because an artist can go from incredible success to failure overnight, just like they can go from being unknown to incredible success overnight. And how they handle that, how they deal with that white hot light of pressure.
Yeah.
It's real. I wouldn't want to be an artist. I can tell you that much. Not that I have the talent to be an artist, but I wouldn't want to be an artist.
So
I wouldn't want everybody knowing like that much about my life.
You have the talent to make the artists look and sound really amazing. And so let's delve into that if that's okay with you. How do you become efficient and a master at what you do like you have now? I understand the theory of mastering everything you do, but walk us through from the discovery to where you are now, like you're at the top of your game.
So I got lucky in that I was one of the last generations of people that really worked through mentorship. So I started in a recording studio in Gloria Stefan's studio, serving coffee, and I did that for years and years. I was an assistant. So what does that mean? That means that you spend thousands of hours being a fly on the wall.
Yep.
And watching real pros do their work. And you don't, if you pay attention, you can kind of learn. And I spent a lot of time in a studio watching how professionals did it, and therefore becoming a professional. And little by little, I would get opportunities. And one of the things I think I did that was smart was, if I got an opportunity that I didn't feel I was ready for, I would tell my boss, listen, I don't think I'm ready for that yet.
Uh-huh.
Because, and he understood that, and you want to put people in a position to succeed.
Yeah.
Not in a position to fail. Because that's also a reflection on you. If you give somebody an opportunity, they're not ready for it, and they fail, how does that reflect on you? How does that reflect on them? You're not helping anybody at that point.
For young getting started in a career, that's really difficult to comprehend, because some of us, when we're really young and we want to make an impact at the workplace, or we want to make an impact in the marketplace, we just want to jump at everything that comes at us. You discover, of course,
eventually that catches up with you. And I feel like right now, with the microwave generations that we're living in,
uh-huh.
You can't cook a steak in a microwave. You just can't. It'll taste like crap, and it'll look bad. And, I think that the people who are really successful are the people who are patient.
Patience.
Because you can't skip those steps.
There's a lot of patience in making your career work, and there's a lot of patience in learning how to succeed. But there's also a lot of patience in the healing process. How are you patient with yourself as you're going through this cancer process?
Well, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 5 years ago. So that came first. It's incredibly frustrating. My wife always tells me you have to have patience. You have to be patient. It's in the name. You are a patient. Therefore, you have to, take it slow. It's. I understand so much more about what people go through with cancer treatment, because one of the things about cancer treatment is it's all counterintuitive. No, we're going to give you chemotherapy. It may make you well, but it's definitely going to make you sick. So that's already counter to what you're used to with any kind of medical problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a medical problem, they give you a pill, you get better. No, here they give you a pill, you get worse. And how do you, that's been the hardest part.
Yeah.
And also, sort of juggling all my diseases has been difficult. But at the same time, you don't choose this. When they say I'm going through this, you literally have to go through it. You can't go around it, you can't go over it, you can't go under it. You have to go through it.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality you have to have. It's like, okay, I gotta go through this, I gotta face it head on. It's gonna suck. But how can I make it, suck a little less? And that's, it's interesting. I get my news now from the comedians at night, because at least I laugh. I think laughing through this, I think being try not to be in situations that are too heavy.
Yeah.
Is important.
Yes.
Because I don't know, I just think that your chemistry changes when you have joy. When you laugh, your chemistry changes.
Yes, it does.
And it helps you heal. And when you're concentrating on something like it's funny, I was able to work on one album that I had started before the diagnosis and finish it. And those moments where I was working on it, like everything else fades away. You know what I mean? Like you work on something, you concentrate on something, all that stuff goes away.
Yeah.
But I'll let you know how it turns out. That's the thing that I always hated about cancer, is that, with most other things, there's like a very clear outcome.
Right.
With cancer, there's not. It's like, this is what we're going to do. And if it all goes right, maybe you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that sucks, man. So, I can't explain to you how much that sucks.
I can't imagine. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and it's difficult for me to imagine what that would look like. But let's talk about something else that you really, really understand really well and have clarity and kind of have an idea of what it would look like. The Latin music has had a profound evolution in the last couple of years. How has the evolution of Latin music affected your approach to production, and how do you stay ahead of the trends, and what should we expect in the next several years as AI is coming into music production?
Well, God, that's a lot to unpack. So for me, it's always been staying true to myself. I don't think that you can stay ahead of trends that you don't really love. So the way I've done it is through mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like, maybe I don't like this kind of music so much, but here's a kid who does. Maybe I can help him, get there, and I can help him not step into landmines that I stepped on, when I was coming up. Figurative landmines, obviously not real ones, but you know what I mean. Like maybe I can help them get from point A to point B without running into so many problems. So that's what I've done.
May I jump here so that we don't lose the nugget you just threw at us, right? That in you finding success, you have to help other people be successful.
Yeah, it's like putting it's like if you're putting nuts for a cold winter. Listen, when you're on your way up, you can do one or two things. You can either leave dying bodies, which are now really dead because you never kill somebody, you just wound them.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can leave seeds on your way up. Because when you're on your way down, either those seeds have grown into trees, or they've grown into people that are really hurt.
Yeah.
And I think it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. It's to try to help people. That way, if you need somebody's help, you can make that call. And they're not wounded. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that mentorship is. And I've been able to help a lot of people, but also I've been able to identify people who have the talent. And I think the other part of that is that my philosophy is that you surround with people who can replace you. Who can do your job better.
That's a big one.
Because that makes you better.
That's a big one.
Yeah, you don't surround yourself with mediocrity. So that's the thing.
I have always told my team leaders, you're really good at your job when you've trained somebody and they do your job better than you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we need to train ourselves out of our positions to allow other people to...
No, and also you want to have a hand in who replaces you.
Exactly.
I do. I know somebody's going to replace me. I'd rather know them.
There you go. So was that part of... Is that part of your values, your ethics values, when you're looking not just at hiring a team member that is coming to work for you, but was that fundamental when you were setting up Rebellion Entertainment?
Well, yeah, but I learned that from people who did that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I learned that from my mentors, and they were very explicit about it. I had one mentor named Eric Schilling, an incredible engineer. I was his assistant for 4 years. And he's like, I'll teach you everything I know if you promise me that you'll do that for somebody else.
Okay.
It wasn't like I didn't have to sit there and figure that out. He just told me, this is the way it's going to work. And if you're not willing to do this for somebody else, then I'm not willing to do it for you. And that was really, that was great that he did that, because I made that promise and I kept it.
So you started interning and learning from professionals, and here you are a recipient of multi-Grammy awards. What disciplines did you apply in your work that immigrants can adopt to so that they can have some impact in life?
Well, the first thing I did was I let the music take me to where it was going. I wasn't like super strict with myself about what kind of music. I was strict with myself that I wanted to work with people who were great, but I could work on any kind of music. And I think that helped me. It helped me to, I think I got to do things that I never thought I would get to do, and music from places that I never thought I would really, get to work on, because I wasn't precious about that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't like, I only want to do punk rock from Southern California. Boom. That's, I love that, but that wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
It's like I wanted to work with people who were great and who were true to what they were doing and who were in search of something. I wanted to really be part of that journey. And I think that that's the thing.
How do you get to a place where you choose greatness and you put yourself in a place where you can associate with it?
Well, I think it's simple. You simplify. I think that's a very simple thing to do. Honestly, like let's say you want to be a chef.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to go work at McDonald's? No, but maybe I would be willing to wash dishes at a great restaurant. Even though I'm washing dishes, I'm around that. You know what I mean? So even though I was serving coffee, I was serving coffee at a great studio with great professionals.
Yes.
And I felt if I'm learning from them, that's the level that I'm aspiring to.
Surround yourself with the right mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you come to this country to do something, and when I was an intern, I worked for free. Everybody loves free,
Mm-hmm.
So I was broke, and when I finally got a job, I was making $7 an hour. Yeah, it was great. I mean, there was Jennifer Lopez and this and that, but I was making $7 an hour. I wasn't, I wasn't like, they weren't writing these fat checks. I wasn't flying private, or, I'm still not, but you know what I mean? Like it wasn't the music business as it's shown on television.
Yeah.
So it was, I think that's the thing, is like you have to be in an environment where people are striving for that or doing that already. Because that's where you're going to learn how to be at that level. That's where you're going to learn what it takes. It becomes from something very like you can put your finger on it once you've seen it. It becomes attainable. You're not great yet, but when you see how people prepare for their day, what people do, what their process is, how they deal with clients, how they deal with artists, you see, what it takes to deal with a superstar.
Yeah.
Even though all you're doing is bringing coffee for free, or going and getting the superstar cheeseburger, No, but that's what it takes. I mean, if you're around it, you get to see it, and you get to apply that to yourself.
So if I am looking to put my talents in the marketplace and I really want to get to a place where I'm competing with the very best of the best, how do I niche myself so that I can get to a place where I can compete with the best of the best?
So the first thing you do, to me, the first advice I give anybody is find out what people don't like doing, what they hate about their job, and learn how to do that. Because that's how you're going to get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask somebody, okay, what's the worst part of your job? The worst part of my job is, I don't know, updating computer software. I hate doing that. I'd rather be doing anything but that. Okay. Then I'll learn that and I'll do that for you. So if you learn how to do those things, you become invaluable, because all of a sudden you took something away from this person that doesn't threaten their job, that they don't like doing. And if you're doing right, you become indispensable.
Wow. Wow, that is
But that
that is quite revealing. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been speaking with Sebastian Krys. Sebastian Krys is an immigrant and a six-time Grammy and 14-time Latin Grammy winning producer, engineer, and music executive. From arriving in the US as an undocumented immigrant to shaping the sound of legends like Shakira, Ricky Martin, and Gloria Estefan, he has succeeded in the music industry and continues to change the world from his humble beginnings and tweaking what music should look like today and in the future. Krys, tell us how our listeners can get a hold of you on social media.
I'm just on Instagram under my name. So just at Sebastian Krys.
I see.
Krys. It's on Instagram.
At Sebastian Krys. All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Look, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for making the time for us. Listen, is it okay if we stay in touch with you? Because I think we need to have a conversation again, and I want to know about your journey.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
And I need some advice as to where to go in Africa when we finally make it there.
We got you on that one, definitely. All right, we're here for you, sir. Keep fighting. Let us know what we can do for you. Thank you again for making the time for us.
Thank you, Martin. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye.